Diamonds, roses, I need Moses to cross the sea of loneliness, part this red river of pain. Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. I was just singing a song about Moses. Oh, what a coincidence. You're here to learn about Moses and how he was leading these people across the desert. And when they came to the mountain of Sinai, they received a renewal in a new covenant. Let's open to Exodus 19:16. If you don't have your Bibles, go pause and go get it and open to chapter 19, verse 16 of the book of Exodus. And when you're ready, it's called the Great Theophany, the Great Revelation of God. Theos meaning God. Phany is like the revelation. So Theophany, Great Revelation of God. On the morning of the third day, there were peals of thunder and lightning and a heavy cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. But Moses led the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stationed themselves at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was all wrapped in smoke, for the Lord came down upon it in fire. The smoke rose from it as though from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The trumpet blast grew louder and louder while Moses was speaking with God and answering him with thunder. When the Lord had came down on top of Mount Sinai, he summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up to him. And the Lord told Moses, "Go down and warn the people not to break through towards the Lord in order to see him. Otherwise, many of them will be struck down. The priests, too, who approach the Lord must sanctify themselves, else he will vent his anger upon them." Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot go up to Mount Sinai, for you yourselves warned us to set limits around the mountain to make it sacred." The Lord repeated, "Go down now. Then come up again along with Aaron, but the priests and the people must not break through to come up to the Lord, else he will vent his anger upon them." So Moses went down to the people and told them this. And then he receives the Ten Commandments. So this is God. Moses takes the people to meet God on Mount Sinai, and then you can see the 12 tribes are arranged around it. You can see the column of pillar, or the pillar of fire and smoke that guided them through the desert. And you can see the mountain is wrapped in clouds. You can see there's the Levites, the tribe of priests in the center there. This is another artist depiction. You can't see the tribes as well, but it's a little more hardcore with the clouds and the thunder. And this was their idea of God. You can see it said Moses stood in the breach, meaning this gap between two rocks. And so that's how they saw God, is like God was so amazing and so like, he is I am who am. He's not just any old God. He's the God of all existence. And if you saw him face to face, it would blow your mind, and your little tiny finite brain would just like ooze out your ears, and your face would melt. And if you've ever seen Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know what I'm talking about. But Moses talked with God face to face, and it says that Moses' face would like shine, and so much so when he came down the mountain, they had to wear a veil because otherwise his face was shining so brightly that it would blind people. So that's how they thought about God. Just you couldn't even approach his throne or approach his grandeur, or you'd just be blown away by how powerful he was. So Moses takes the people to the mountain of God, Sinai. Sometimes it's called Horeb in the Bible. It goes by a couple different names. And this is where they received the covenant. This is one of the 20 key events of Old Testament history we learned about. By the way, this is notes 4, so you need the notes 4 handout if you have not gotten that already. It looks like this. You can get this from online or in class. And that's what you should be looking at and going through as we go through this. So a couple things that happen here. First of all, God says, "You will be my people and I will be your God." Again, this seems like a normal kind of throwaway line to us, but this is a big deal for the Hebrews. We think of God as like, oh yeah, we're all God's children, but that's not how they thought about it. The Israelites were God's children. The Egyptians weren't. That's why when God drowns them in the Red Sea and like kills off their firstborn, it's not like, oh my gosh, God is so evil. It's no, like, God is awesome. He's protecting us from these oppressors. So again, that seems weird to us, but remember, this is very early on in the revelation of God. And so they don't understand that eventually God will through them, they will be a light to the nations, and God will reveal his plan to save all people. So God promises to bless the Hebrews and bring them to the promised land, just as he had before. And the Hebrews promise to obey God's law, and they agree to punishment if they disobey. They agree to this law, and then they seal this with the ritual sacrifice of a bull. So they sacrifice a bull, and the priests, the Levites, the tribe of Levi, they take the blood and they sprinkle it on the people, and that's called the blood of the covenant. And that language for Christians will get used again. Jesus will say at the Last Supper that this cup of wine is my blood of the new covenant. So Jesus will use that symbolism. And on Easter, which is right around this time of year, in a lot of Christian churches, they do what's called the sprinkling rite, where the priest will go around and he'll take either like a branch or sometimes a little metal thing, and he'll dip it in water, and he'll sprinkle the whole congregation with water as a reminder of their baptism. And it's also a reminder of that's the new covenant. So throwback to this moment in Scripture when Moses sprinkled the people with the blood to say, now you are sealed with the blood of this covenant. You are now God's people. So if you're ever at church and the priest does that, that is a callback to this and also to our baptism. So the Ten Commandments, we studied this earlier in the year when we were talking about morality and Christian action in Unit 2, applying it to our lives. I want to talk a little bit about how it applies to the Hebrews back then, because there's some slight differences, and there's a warm-up about this as well. So that's from the famous Charleston Heston movie, The Ten Commandments, from back in like the 50s or 60s. So I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods besides me, right? They were supposed to worship just the Lord, not the gods of the other nations. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. I think we normally think of this today as like not using God's name as a curse word, or saying, oh my God, or Jesus Christ, or, GD this, GD that. And that's probably how they would have used it too, but they actually didn't say God's name at all. And it wasn't just God for them, it was Yahweh. That's in Hebrew, the I am who am, the name that God gives Moses, that God says, this is my name, when he says to Moses, when Moses says, what's your name? He says, I am who am, Yahweh. That's God's name. It's God's like specific name. And they're not supposed to say it. They never said it. Even when they wrote it, they wrote the Lord. They wouldn't write it out. So remember to keep hold of the Sabbath day. We tend to think of this as Sunday because Christians celebrate Sunday, which is the Lord's Day, the day of resurrection. It says in the book of Revelation that the prophet John was in the temple on the Lord's Day. So we know from very early on in the Bible, Christians celebrated on Sunday. But the Jewish Sabbath day was Saturday. And if we spoke Spanish, this would make sense to us because sábado is Saturday. It means Sabbath. Domingo is Sunday. That means the Lord's Day. So so Christians, Jewish Christians in the early days would celebrate both Jewish Sabbath and the Christian Lord's Day. And then as many Christians, through the years, most Christians were Gentiles. They didn't celebrate the Sabbath day, they celebrated the Lord's Day. So, but we apply that Sabbath mentality to the Lord's Day, even though we celebrate it on a different day today. Honor your mother and your father. I think that applies very similarly back then and today. Thou shalt not kill. It might seem a little strange to us because they do a lot of killing in the Old Testament, but they weren't supposed to kill. You shall not commit adultery, so not cheating on your spouse. You shall not steal. Shall not bear false witness. Shall not lie. Again, that's very similar to today. Shall not covet your neighbor's wife. So, and you shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. These are, I think, these are very much, these last two, it can seem kind of like, why did they just make it on the Ten Commandments? Like, it seems a little weird to like, that to be a sin to like want what your neighbor has. But think about it this way. Coveting is not just wanting something. If my friend has nice shoes and I'm like, oh, those are nice shoes, that's not, maybe I'll get some of those shoes. That's not coveting. Coveting is when it's like, oh, he got new shoes again. I can't afford new shoes. He's so lucky. He's ravished for my family. When like it becomes coveting when not only do you want the thing that person has, but it makes you resent them and feel bad about yourself. That's when it becomes coveting, and that's like poison for your soul when you do that. Because it's the opposite of gratitude, right? And this is why Christians often say, count your blessings, right? You should go through your day and be counting your blessings and thank God for your good things. And that's one of the things that Jesus tells us when he prays, to thank God for the good things we have. And that's something modern psychology tells us to do oftentimes when people go to therapy and counseling and that sort of thing. A lot of times the therapist or the counselor will say, make a gratitude list, make a list of things that you're thankful for. And that combats this sort of thinking. So the next time you're scrolling through social media, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, and you find yourself feeling insecure about yourself because you're not as cool as that person, or as good looking as that person, or have as much nice things as that person, or have as many friends as that person, that's coveting, right? That's when you're wanting what they have, you're feeling bad about yourself, and you're kind of resenting that person a little bit. And the antidote to that is to be grateful for what you do have, to make your gratitude list. So I end with those two, and I think it's a good commandments to end with, is because they're reminders for us that these commandments are not for God, they're for our benefit. Right? It's not like God just reached into a hat and said, "These are 10 things that I'm going to get ticked off about." Okay, and if you break these, I'm going to get so mad and send you to hell. Like they're not for His benefit; they're for ours. God knows that if we don't follow these commandments, it's going to mean like destruction in our lives. It's going to mean sadness in our lives. But if we do follow these rules, it's going to mean life for us. Remember, God says, and this was in your warm-ups, and it's in notes 5 as well, that God gives them a choice. He says, you can choose life or you can choose death. How do you choose life? Follow the commandments. How do you choose death? Don't follow the commandments. And it's not like a threat. It's not a punishment. It's just like, touch the stove, you get burned. Don't touch the stove, you won't get burned. So don't touch the stove. That's how these commandments are meant to be taken. Okay, and they're listed in 2 places. They're in Exodus 20. They're also in Deuteronomy 5. And again, they're not just meant to be don't do this, don't do that. They're meant to be read broadly. So Jesus encourages this interpretation in the New Testament. He'll say, you have heard you shall not commit adultery, but I say don't even lust after someone. That's very much in the spirit of the 10 Commandments. So if you've ever looked at so number 8 is you shall not bear false witness. It doesn't mean just don't technically lie. It means you should be honest. And this is very much in our school's honor code. If you look in the handbook where it talks about the honor code, it's the first thing it says before it says don't plagiarize, don't copy, that sort of thing. It says students should be honest. They should be people of integrity. It says these are meant to be interpreted broadly. We're not just saying don't break these narrow rules. We're saying you should be a person of integrity and honesty. So, and number 5 doesn't just mean don't kill. It means be a peaceful and forgiving person. Now, what's interesting is different religions, different groups of Christians and Jews and Orthodox and Catholic and Protestant Christians, we all agree that there's 10 commandments, and we all agree what's in them, but we number them differently. Interesting. We agree on the overall content, but we number them differently. So on the back of your handout, some people consider I am the Lord your God, and you shall have no other gods before me as 2 different commandments. I'm sorry, and you shall not make yourself an idol. Some consider like making an idol and worshiping another god as 2 different commandments. Catholics, we tend to consider them as one. And then some, where's that slide? Some consider you shall not covet your neighbor's house or covet your neighbor's wife. Some consider those 1 commandment. Some consider them 2 commandments. So everybody agrees these are the 10 commandments. There's 10 of them, and this is what's in them. But some people just kind of number them differently. So if you went to a non-Catholic Christian school or a non-Catholic Christian church, you might have learned the numbering differently, and that's fine. That's just for some reason Christians and Jewish people have just done it different ways throughout the years. So that's fine. I think that's all I have to tell you about the covenant on Sinai. If you want to watch a little kind of silly thing that I did on the 10 Commandments, you can go to my YouTube channel. I did a little video with a priest friend of mine on the 10 Commandments. It's rap, and if you're into musical theater, you'll like that too because it's a parody of a Hamilton song. So anyway, find that on my YouTube channel if you're interested. It's pretty goofy. I made it in the Pilates Chapel. We had a good time making it, and that's all I have for you. So stay safe, and I'll see you soon.